Welcome back to my channel. If you're like, wow, she is sounding way better than she usually does. Audio quality, it's there. That is because, technological genius that I am, I figured out that for all the videos I've been filming, I never turned this thing on. That's right, I have this lovely fancy microphone and I never turned it on. But now I have, so hopefully this sounds fantastic. This episode, this study, is, if you can recall back to my wonderful episode with Venn diagrams for fall, for the best fall books, I briefly mentioned that I actually had 2 book series that I considered perfect for fall, for autumn, for spooky season. And I mentioned one, but I didn't mention the other, and that was because I wanted to give this other series its whole own episode because I love it so much, but also because I didn't actually physically own the books at the time, and I still don't. Today I got them from the library because libraries are awesome, and you should always take advantage of them when you can. And actually, I started reading this series because the audiobook was available through my library, and the audiobooks are fantastic, but we'll get to that. So, yeah. So without further ado, allow me to introduce you to Lockwood Co. This is a series by Jonathan Stroud. He's a British author. It says it's for middle grade. It's in the middle grade section of your library probably, but especially towards the end, it does have more YA, young adult leanings. And even from the beginning, the narration, again, while it's suitable for children, to me it really appeals. It's going to have a lot of appeal for young adults and new adults, so like in your early 20s. A lot of themes within this book are really relatable to someone my age. I started this book series in February of this year, and a few weeks before, about a month before, I had started applying for jobs, for like my first real proper adult job. And I was waiting to hear back from this one job that I really, really wanted at the time. I don't know about that anymore. But I really wanted it, and it was going to be perfect for me. And I was waiting and waiting and waiting. And the day before I heard about the job, I was really depressed, so I took myself on a little free library driving tour, drove around, and just listened to the Lockwood Co. audiobook for the first book all day. And it was so immersive and so easy to just escape into that when I got home, I was still like in this daze. I just got out a cup of tea because this is a book you're going to want a hot cup of tea for. They talk about tea so much in these books. You need tea and biscuits to read them. And I just stood there staring into space, finishing it, and I felt so great. And I got the job the next day. And these books really helped me get through that transition period of really starting work for the first time. So the plot of these books follows a slightly alternate version of Great Britain where ghosts have taken over. Essentially, they call it the problem because that's like the most British thing you could do, is have this horrible, supernatural, ongoing problem where these ghosts are causing the deaths of many people, many people, and you just call it the problem. Keep calm, carry on, as they do. And only children can see the psychic phenomenon that ghosts produce. So essentially you end up with armies of child soldiers who are on the front lines fighting ghosts and keeping these visitors who have returned from the grave for reasons nobody knows at bay. They use silver, salt, and iron, which are all very traditional ghost fighting elements. If you've ever read any other ghost folklore or history, that's the great tradition. So I love how Jonathan Stroud really embraced the real side of ghost folklore in his books, as much as, you know, these are just fantastical middle grade novels. And a lot of the children, most children, end up in these big agencies that work together to fight ghosts. So the agencies have like adult supervisors, but only the children can see the ghosts, so they send the children, you know, as armed as they can, but probably not as well advised as they can. I mean, imagine if your supervisor is sending you into a life or death situation, and not only is your supervisor not going into the life or death situation with you, but they can't see or hear anything you are fighting against. And children as young as 7, I believe, in the books start ghost fighting. The main character, Lucy, I believe starts when she's 7 years old as a apprentice ghost fighter. So the books take place in England, mainly London. And in London, you've got these massive agencies, like hundreds and hundreds of child agents, especially teenage agents. And they're all fighting ghosts. And those agencies are called Fitz, Rotwell, there's a few others. But Lockwood Co. is the smallest agency in London. And it is the only one run by the agents themselves. So Lockwood, Anthony Lockwood, he is the owner of Lockwood Co. He's the head of their group. And then there's their researcher assistant, George. And then in comes Lucy, who is our narrator. Now, this is one of the first things I love about this series, is that it's called Lockwood & Co., but your narrator, and through all the books, is Lucy. And to me, that gives a very Holmes and Watson vibe, where you have Lucy, who is very much your main character, and yet to her, in the book's title, Lockwood is the main character. He's the main character in her life. So, with Watson narrating Holmes, Holmes is the main character of Watson's life, not Watson himself, not Lucy herself. Although Lucy has a lot going for her throughout these books, but that was one of my first initial reactions to these books, was how much I loved the Holmes and Watson vibes. So Lucy comes to London, she gets rejected by the big agencies, and she ends up at Lockwood & Co. And that is the beginning of this book. First of all, the first book, the pacing, that was another thing that blew me away in the first book, was the pacing. So they open with this explosive ghost fight with Lockwood and Lucy and this ghost that they've been asked to clear out of this haunted house. And there's sort of an accidental arson moment that gets involved. And right when they're at like the fever pitch, it goes backwards. So the book stops and turns back to several weeks or months ago, when Lucy had just arrived in London. So you can see it says before for part 2. And I love that. I thought that was brilliant pacing, because you're on the edge of your seat wanting to know what happened, but then you're also on the edge of your seat trying to understand the backstory of how Lucy ended up here, of how all the ghosts and everything work. Again, with the salt and silver and iron, all of that is explained really well. And yet you don't have that issue of like, oh, here's the boring backstory we got to get through before we get to the action. So I thought that was fantastic in the first book. And Lucy as a narrator is phenomenal. She is hilarious. She's brutally honest and aggressively oblivious. Like, there were a lot of moments where you're like, Lucy, girl. You get really frustrated with her, but at the same time you're like, if I was in your shoes, girl, I would feel the same way. In fact, in some of the later books, this is book 4. They only had books 1 and 4 at the library. There's 5 books in total. And in books 3 and 4, she goes through her really edgy teen phase. She ends up, not to spoil, well, I don't want to spoil it, so I'm not going to spoil it, but things take a turn, and she's like really grumpy for a lot of the book. And I saw some fans online were like, oh, Jonathan Stroud, like, you're just like degrading her as a character and making her like jealous of this other character. It's really kind of, contrived and whatever. But for me, I'm like, girl, Lucy, I am right there with you. I would be feeling the same way. I'd be acting the same way. I am petty. I am annoying. And I'm not even 16 anymore. Like, she is 16. She's a child soldier. They are going through literal hell and back half the time. And yeah, she's allowed to have an attitude. The narrator in the audiobook, right, it's Lucy narrating the audiobook, is especially fantastic, except there's 2 or 3 of them. I think there's 3 of them. The first book and the second book are either the same person or they're very close to sounding like the same person. And they have a very traditional British accent, and they're really great narrators. You're like, yes, okay. And then the third book, first of all, it's always jarring when the narrator changes. in a series. I've read other series where this has happened before. Heroes of Olympus, I'm looking at you. It changed for the worse for you. But that's another story. But Lucy's other narrator, her for the last 3 books, has the accent that Lucy is supposed to have. She comes from the north, so she has a northern accent. Now, I lived in the north of England, and it is a very heavy accent. It's still understandable in the audiobook. You'll be fine. But I ended up loving that touch where you get just the full attitude with the accent that is very much a part of Northern British personalities. So there are 5 books, as I said. Each one, honestly, more fantastic than the last. I tried rereading them, and it was honestly, like, I did reread them because I thought they were okay my first go, and then as I kept reading them, like the first one, I was like, that was good. I enjoyed that. Let me do the next one. And I was like, that was pretty good. I enjoyed that. Let me do the next one. And then by the third one, I was like, this is everything to me. I need to go reread the first few before I keep going because, oh my God, there's so much. I have so many feelings. I need to read these with all my feelings. And it was a bit of a struggle to get through, mostly because I had just read them. Like, this was a reread happening like a month and a half later. Of the 5 books, oh no, this is book 3. This is book 3. This is book 3. I get them confused. A lot of the books are named after things that happen in the end. So the Screaming Staircase doesn't really show up until the end of the book. The Hollow Boy doesn't show up until the end of the book, which isn't really a spoiler. But so they confuse me because then that carries over into the next book more than it does in this book. But anyways, of the 5 books, they really do get better as they go along. Not that they start off bad, but it's hard to pick a favorite. It's hard to... I really do like the 4th one. The 4th one is the one that's really different. And the 5th one. The 5th one is the only one I haven't reread. And I have the feeling if I reread it, it would be my favorite. But then there are also like... There's also... The other great thing about these books is that the way it's divided up, like in the first one where, you know, you have the explosive beginning and then a bit backstory and then we continue with the explosive, you know, main story, is that there are these like sub-stories. So in this one, there is this ongoing crisis of the problem in part of London, and it's going on in the background, and that becomes the main plot of the book. But in the meanwhile, they're also doing these other ghost cases in random houses and stuff. And some of those random cases are my favorite parts. So in the 4th book, there is this incredible case that's not quite right at the start, but right in the beginning, that takes place. The ghost is a cannibal, and it's so creepy and so eerie. And I just love that. And I would just reread that scene over and over again. I gotta get physical copies of the book so I can do that. And then in the 5th book, there's another story that's like kind of at the beginning. And again, this is just kind of like a sub-moment of the overarching plot. That case is another one of my favorites. It's so good. It's so much fun. And it has a lot of emotional consequences to it. And those are the parts that I love. I love the most. There's a part in book 3? No, book 2, where that one, no, book 3? I literally cannot keep track. This is what happens when you read a series and reread it at the same time. As you can tell, my love for this series is so much. It's a bit too much. I don't think there's such thing as too much, but it's all getting very mixed up and layered and messy. And I can't even bring you sensible words to tell you how much I love this series. But I haven't even yet, I got this far, and I haven't even told you about my favorite part of the series is a character I haven't even mentioned yet. Oh, I don't know if I can mention this character. That would be a spoiler. I'm sorry. I will say this character, I can give you one of my favorite quotes from this character. This character has something happen to them, and they end up in a kind of isolated place with bad guys. And so obviously the team goes in to rescue this character. And my favorite part is they're talking to each other, and they can like hear each other without having like they're kind of on a cell phone call essentially. And person's like, "Where are you? You know, I'm trapped in here." And they're like, "Oh, well, you know, we're waiting in line and we're looking around." And what? He's like, "Are you queuing? How British are you? Get out of line and start killing people." Which is just one of my favorite lines I've ever read. If I was a little more unhinged, I would actually get that line tattooed on my body because I love it so much. I probably don't do it justice. You're probably like, it's one of those, you need to be there, you need the context thing. But I love it. Can I just tell you? Okay, this is a spoiler if you're going to read the books. But my favorite character is a skull in a jar. It is a ghost skull in a jar. It's a skull, and the ghost is like, the spirit is tied to the object, the skull. And this is my favorite character. So imagine a talking skull giving you attitude. That's why the audiobooks are so good, mostly just for him. The audiobooks, he's hilarious. Now, I made myself some questions to guide myself through this, and one of my questions was, what was the most disappointing part of a series? Because, you know, sometimes series have like a weak middle or an ending that you weren't hoping for, or sometimes their authors turn out to be absolute transphobic psychopaths, and then that's really disappointing, and it makes you never want to, like, it just really gives you the ick when you go to watch or read the stuff again for nostalgia's sake, and it's, yeah. But I gotta tell you, the most disappointing part of this series so far, Jonathan Stroud, I'm counting on you not to be a psycho, is that it ends. Genuinely, the most disappointing part of this series to me is that there was not more of it. Especially because it ends in a way that it could be open for more. I may or may not have written Jonathan Stroud a 6-page letter asking him to write more. Especially short stories. These would be so good as short stories, just like cases that the team has done over the years. I just desperately want more. And that disappointment, that desperation for more, is just made all the more poignant and all the more aggressive because this series also has one of the best book-to-screen adaptations I have ever seen. It is on par with Disney Plus, the Disney Plus Percy Jackson series, where it gets not only the aesthetics and the look and you feel like you're really there, but it also gets the emotional depth even more than the books do, because the books are like middle grade and, you know, they've been around for some years. And also in this case, the series is finished, so they can start laying Easter eggs for various things to come later in the series. And they did that. Not Netflix, because of course Netflix bought the series, but Complete Fiction is the production company that made it. And they did such a phenomenal job. The actors that are in the series are incredibly flawless, as good, if not better, than the Percy Jackson casting. I said it. Seriously. They nailed them emotionally and physically. The way they got Lockwood to look like Lockwood is insane. It's insane. And just the facial expressions, the smiles, like Lockwood smiles a lot in the series. He's always flashing fake smiles, real smiles, to reassure everybody, and Lucy points them out a lot. And the way they got that in the series is incredible. And again, the aesthetic, everything is so good. And it is so good that Netflix canceled it after one season. That's how you know shows are good these days. They get canceled before they're finished because they know they're going to get good, they're going to get big, and they're going to have to pay more for them. That's my take anyways. It's disappointing. And Netflix, I will be haunting you forever for this. I'm in your walls. So genuinely, the worst thing I can say about this series is that it ends and that there isn't more and that the series is so good and it ends. So this is me sharing my love for it and hoping I can end my disappointment a little by getting other people to read it so I can talk about it, so I can feel like it's still ongoing. I actually did get one of my friends to read it and she loved it. Thank you for that, girl. Really felt validating. So at the beginning of this vlog, I mentioned that these books really helped me get through the transition period of having my first real adult job. And before I sign off, I just wanted to explain how and why. And the how and why is obviously like, you know, you have these young people who are young, who are kind of forced to grow up before their time. And if you haven't been able to tell from just my personality, I am not a stranger to Peter Pan syndrome. I don't really want to grow up. I buy books. I love DuckTales. I don't want this adult job thing. I literally have a DuckTales pin in my cubicle. Not to mention all these other. I have Skull hanging in my cubicle. And so to see these people, these characters that I love, have to deal with really grown up and adult things, and very like even just like the bureaucracy of the other large agencies and the police trying to monitor their small agency was just so validating and helpful for me as, you know, a first time real adult job. Plus, as I mentioned, it's the children who can see the ghosts and manifestations. It kind of reminds me of the Polar Express, where when you're a kid you can hear Santa's bells, but when you don't believe in him anymore you can't really hear it. So adults can't see or hear ghosts even if they could in their youth. So they kind of grow out of it. And there is a character within this series who has one of the best arcs ever. Like, I love this character. It's seriously one of the best things, and it's so unique the way his character I mean, maybe it's not super unique, but I love it. He's fantastic. And this character is one who is losing this ability, is growing out of it. He's reached this age where, you know, his powers are fading, and just watching him go through that, even as this you know, side character really pushed to the side, again, was just so validating to me. It was like you're being forced into things that you don't want to do, and forced to grow up and do these adult things, again, that you don't want to do one way or another. Like, it was just so amazing. So if you're struggling to adapt, go through a transition, especially a career-related one, I highly recommend Lockwood Co. Or if you just want the most perfect, fantastic, gothic, spooky, ghost-centered series ever, go read it. Check out the audiobooks. Watch the series on Netflix. Check them out from your library. And make yourself a good cup of tea. That's the real necessity. Get yourself a cup of tea to read this. If you've made it this far in this video, please leave me a ghost emoji or a skull emoji. I really love Skull. Honestly, one of the saddest things in life is that I'll never get to meet. Is that weird? That I want to meet a talking skull in a jar? I don't know. I feel like he'd be great company. Lucy finds him incredibly annoying, and he probably is. But also, as a very somewhat isolated, only child kind of person. Anyways, ghost emoji, skull emoji, and I hope you all have a very happy Halloween!